I never expected my ex-wife's wedding to become the ultimate vindication. When her arrogant new husband sneered at my failure and told me to cut ties with his wife, I decided to close my $500 million account at her bank. The look on their faces? Priceless. But that was just the beginning of how I turned 20 years of disrespect into the sweetest revenge. My name is Daniel Morris. I'm 52 years old, and I compose music for films. Not the blockbuster superhero flicks that teenagers line up for, but thoughtful independent productions that critics love and few people actually watch. At least that was true until 7 years ago, when everything changed, both in my career and my personal life. I still remember the day Susan told me she was leaving. It was 2008, and the financial world was crumbling around us. Wall Street executives were jumping ship, banks were failing, and regular folks were losing their homes. I was working on a score for a documentary about climate change. Not exactly lucrative work, but meaningful to me. "This isn't working anymore, Dan," she said, standing in the doorway of my studio, arms crossed like she was protecting herself from something contagious. "I need stability, security, and you're still chasing this dream." The way she said dream made it sound like a terminal illness. "My music pays the bills," I argued, though we both knew her job at Bennett Financial brought in 3 times what I made. "Barely," she replied. "And what about Emily's college fund? What about retirement? What about the future?" Our daughter was only 9 then. College seemed a lifetime away, but Susan always planned 10 steps ahead. It was what made her excellent at restructuring failing companies, and apparently at restructuring failing marriages. I didn't fight when she left. Maybe that's what she expected, that I'd finally wake up, give up my childish pursuits, and get a real job like the other husbands in our Westchester neighborhood. But that was never who I was. After the divorce, I moved to a small apartment in Brooklyn and threw myself into my work. Susan quickly climbed the corporate ladder at Bennett Financial, eventually becoming their CFO, while I continued composing. Emily split her time between us, though as she grew older, she seemed to prefer my cramped apartment with its grand piano taking up half the living room to Susan's pristine mansion in the suburbs. Then came the score that changed everything. A small independent film about a jazz musician in 1960s New Orleans. I poured everything into it, every disappointment, every moment of doubt. When it won the Oscar for Best Original Score, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Suddenly, I wasn't just Daniel Morris, struggling composer. I was Daniel Morris, Academy Award winner. The irony wasn't lost on me. Susan had left because my career wasn't stable enough, and now my compositions were earning millions. I'd established my own production company, built a reputation, invested wisely. The struggling artist had become a success story. Not that Susan would ever acknowledge it. And now, sitting in my Manhattan penthouse looking at the elegant invitation in my hands, I had to decide whether to attend her wedding to Lawrence Grayson, venture capitalist extraordinaire and aspiring politician. The man who, according to Emily, looked at me during parent-teacher conferences like I was something stuck to the bottom of his Italian leather shoes. I should have thrown the invitation away. Nothing good could come from going. But something, curiosity, perhaps, or a perverse desire to see Susan's face when she realized how much had changed, made me RSVP yes. Sometimes the best revenge isn't planned at all. It just happens when you stay true to yourself. The evening of Susan's wedding arrived with a perfect September sunset, painting the Manhattan skyline in hues of gold. I adjusted my tie in the back of the Uber, second-guessing my decision to attend. The venue was one of those exclusive rooftop gardens that require connections just to book a viewing. Exactly Susan's style. I stepped out of the elevator into a scene that seemed plucked from a luxury magazine spread. Crystal chandeliers suspended from transparent canopies, white orchids cascading from every surface, waiters gliding between clusters of New York's elite with flutes of champagne. "Dad, you actually came." Emily appeared at my side, stunning in a bridesmaid's dress the color of champagne. At 19, she looked more like Susan every day, except for her eyes, though she got from me. "Wouldn't miss it," I lied smoothly. "How's your mother?" Emily rolled her eyes, micromanaging everything. You know how she gets. I didn't know. Susan's need for control had been the undercurrent of our marriage, the quiet riptide that eventually pulled us apart. "And the groom?" I asked, scanning the crowd. "Larry's around somewhere. probably talking about his congressional run. Emily's voice held an edge. She'd never warmed to her stepfather-to-be, despite his attempts to win her over with expensive gifts and connections at prestigious universities. I spotted Jason across the room, Susan's younger brother and the only member of her family who had kept in touch after the divorce. Unlike his sister, Jason had always respected my choice to pursue music, even showing up at small club performances in my lean years. Uncle Dan. He embraced me with genuine warmth. Damn, you're looking good. Success suits you. You too, I said, noting his designer suit. Jason had made his own fortune in tech startups, far from the financial world Susan inhabited. Fair warning, he murmured. Larry's been asking who invited you. Seems threatened. I sipped my champagne. By the struggling musician? Jason snorted. Man, he has no idea, does he? Susan never told him about your Oscar? Your company? Apparently not. This should be interesting, Jason said with a mischievous glint. Especially since he's been telling everyone you're. He stopped abruptly as a tall, silver-haired man approached, his arm possessively around Susan's waist. She looked beautiful, elegant, polished, perfect. Our eyes met, and for a moment, something flickered there, surprise perhaps, or regret. Then it vanished behind her practiced socialite smile. Daniel, she said coolly, you came. Before I could respond, Larry stepped forward, extending his hand with the practiced charm of a politician. So you're the ex-husband. Susan mentioned you. Teach music. And there it was, the first shot fired. Teach music. I repeated Larry's words with a bemused smile. Not exactly. Susan shifted uncomfortably. Daniel composes film scores, she clarified, though her explanation fell deliberately short of the whole truth. Fascinating, Larry said with the enthusiasm of someone discussing tax regulations. Must be creative work. Any films I might have heard of? Before I could answer, Emily jumped in. Dad won an Oscar for Midnight in New Orleans and just signed a contract with Paramount for their new historical drama series. Larry's practiced smile faltered momentarily. An Oscar? Well, that's unexpected. Life's full of surprises, I said mildly, enjoying his discomfort. Susan quickly steered the conversation elsewhere, her hand tightening on Larry's arm, a gesture I recognized from our marriage. It meant, stop talking before you embarrass yourself. Emily, would you show your father to his table? The ceremony will begin soon. As we walked away, Emily muttered, sorry about that. Larry's been telling everyone you're some struggling piano teacher who couldn't cut it in the real world. And your mother didn't correct him? Emily shrugged. Mom's complicated. I think part of her needs to believe you're still failing to justify leaving. I was seated at a table far from the bridal party, not quite banished to Siberia, but definitely not in the inner circle. Jason joined me minutes later, along with a few distant relatives who regarded me with curious glances. You realize you're the evening's mystery guest, right? Jason said. Half the room is wondering why the ex-husband is here, and the other half is trying to figure out if you're the same Daniel Morris who's revolutionizing film scoring. I sipped my champagne. Let them wonder. The ceremony began as the sun disappeared behind the Manhattan skyline. Susan looked radiant as she walked down the aisle, every inch the successful executive marrying into an equally successful partnership. Looking at her now, confident, polished, so sure of her path, it was hard to remember the younger Susan who had once curled against me on our threadbare couch, dreaming of simpler things. When they exchanged vows, I felt nothing but a distant melancholy for what might have been. We had loved each other once, but we'd wanted fundamentally different lives. Perhaps in this, at least, we had both won. As the ceremony concluded and guests moved to the reception area, Emily appeared at my side. You okay, Dad? I smiled at my daughter, so perceptive and kind despite growing up amid our fractured family. I'm perfect. Your mother seems happy. Emily nodded. She is mostly, though sometimes I catch her looking at your album when she thinks no one's watching. We all have our ghosts, I said softly, even those of us who seem to have everything figured out. The wedding reception was in full swing, crystal glasses clinking as New York's elite mingled beneath the stars. I stayed on the periphery, nursing a scotch and observing the social dynamics at play. This was Susan's world now, boardrooms and benefit galas, power brokers and politicians. Not your scene, is it? Jason appeared beside me, loosening his tie. Never was Susan's either, once upon a time. I raised an eyebrow. People change. Do they? Jason leaned against the balcony railing. Or do they just get better at pretending to be what others expect? Before I could respond, a commotion near the gift table caught our attention. Emily was engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with Larry. Though they kept their voices low, their body language spoke volumes. Emily rigid with anger, Larry's finger jabbing the air between them. I straightened, parental instinct kicking in. "Excuse me." As I approached, I caught fragments of their conversation. "Disrespectful to your mother," Larry was saying. "After everything she's done. You don't know anything about my father," Emily shot back. "You never bothered to." "I know enough," Larry interrupted. "A man who puts his artistic integrity above providing for his family. Is there a problem?" I kept my voice level, placing a protective hand on Emily's shoulder. Larry turned, his politician's mask slipping to reveal genuine dislike. "Family discussion, Morris. Nothing that concerns you anymore." "My daughter concerns me," I said, steel beneath my calm tone. "Always." Emily squeezed my hand. "Larry thinks my internship at your studio next summer is beneath my potential. He wants me to work for his campaign instead." I met Larry's gaze steadily. "Emily makes her own choices. She always has." "Choices have consequences," Larry replied. "Susan and I want what's best for her future. A serious career, not following her father's unconventional path." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. 20 years ago, it might have struck a nerve. Back when I wondered if Susan had been right to leave, if my stubbornness had cost me my family. But that uncertainty had long since vanished with success on my own terms. "My past seems to have worked out just fine," I said mildly. "But then, some people measure success by bank balances and social standing. Others by the courage to follow their passion despite the risks." Larry's face flushed. "Easy to romanticize passion when you're not responsible for others." "Dad paid for half my tuition," Emily interjected. "Even when he was barely making ends meet. He never missed a child support payment, never missed a recital or graduation. So don't you dare." "Emily," I said gently, "it's okay." She took a deep breath, composing herself with effort. "I need some air," she said, and walked toward the terrace. Larry watched her go, then turned back to me. "You filled her head with impractical notions. The arts are a hobby, not a career." I smiled. "Tell that to my Oscar. Or my accountant." His expression hardened. "You got lucky. Lightning strikes once. But Emily deserves better than a gamble." "What Emily deserves," I said, "is to be surrounded by people who believe in her capabilities, not just their vision of what she should become." I walked away then, leaving Larry staring after me, his carefully constructed narrative about the failed musician ex-husband beginning to unravel. As dinner concluded, Susan approached our table, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Having a good time?" she asked, her voice carrying the professional warmth she'd perfected over the years. "Beautiful ceremony," I offered. "Larry seems confident." "He is." Susan glanced around to ensure we weren't overheard. "Listen, about Emily's internship. It's not up for discussion," I said calmly. "She's an adult making her own choices." Susan sighed. "Music is unstable, Daniel. You got lucky, but..." "Lucky," I repeated. 20 years of hard work isn't luck. You know what I mean. For every success like yours, thousands of musicians struggle their entire lives." I studied her, realizing she still couldn't admit she'd been wrong about my career. And yet here we are. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us until Jason saved the moment, appearing with fresh champagne. "To new beginnings," he toasted, winking at me. Susan excused herself to rejoin Larry, who'd been watching our interaction with poorly disguised suspicion. "You know," Jason said once she was gone, "she kept your piano. The baby grand from your apartment in Brooklyn. It's in her study now." The revelation caught me off guard. That piano had been my first major purchase after our separation, a symbol of commitment to my craft despite uncertainty. "Interesting choice of souvenir," I murmured. "People hold on to strange things," Jason shrugged. "Speaking of which, Larry's giving a speech soon. Should be enlightening." Sure enough, Larry took the microphone minutes later, champagne in hand. He thanked guests for attending, praised Susan's intelligence and beauty, and then pivoted unexpectedly. "Some questioned our relationship," he said, gaze drifting in my direction. Some believed Susan deserved someone who couldn't provide stability, who chose artistic indulgence over family responsibility. The room tensed. Emily, seated at the bridal party table, stared at her plate. Susan's smile remained fixed, though her knuckles whitened around her champagne flute. But tonight proves that proper choices lead to proper outcomes, Larry continued. Success isn't accidental, it's deliberate. It comes from sound judgment and traditional values. Jason whispered, is he seriously turning a wedding toast into a campaign speech? I watched Susan, recognizing the slight flush creeping up her neck, a tell from our marriage that meant she was mortified but hiding it. Some paths lead to dead ends, Larry concluded, while others lead to prosperity. I'm grateful Susan found her way to the right one. Polite applause followed as he returned to Susan's side, kissing her cheek triumphantly. What a tool, Jason muttered. You okay? I nodded, surprisingly unaffected. Perfect, actually, and I meant it. Watching Larry's desperate need to establish dominance, I felt nothing but clarity and the certainty that the next phase of the evening would be very interesting indeed. The reception shifted into the dancing portion of the evening. I remained at my table, content to observe as Manhattan's elite performed the intricate social choreography they perfected over decades. Susan and Larry moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and making connections, their natural habitat. Aren't you going to dance, Dad? Emily appeared beside me, cheeks flushed from champagne. Not really my scene, sweetheart. She rolled her eyes. Come on. One dance won't kill you. Unable to refuse her, I allowed myself to be led to the dance floor. As we swayed to a jazz standard, ironically, one I'd rearranged for a film last year, I caught Susan watching us, her expression unreadable. Larry's still fuming about your internship, Emily said quietly. Let him fume. He told Mom it's ridiculous that I would waste my education on a frivolous industry when I could be making connections in finance or politics. I kept my expression neutral despite my rising irritation. And what did you tell him? That I'd rather create something meaningful than spend my life selling influence. Emily grinned mischievously. He didn't appreciate that. As the song ended, Larry appeared, his politician smile firmly in place though his eyes remained cold. Mind if I borrow Emily for a moment? Senator Blackwood wants to discuss summer internship opportunities in Washington. Actually, Emily began. It's Emily's choice, I interjected calmly. Larry's smile tightened. Some choices require adult guidance. Not everyone understands what's at stake. You'd be surprised what I understand, I replied evenly. Would I? His veneer slipped slightly. Let's be honest, Morris. You're a middle school dropout who got lucky with a little tune. What could you possibly understand about building a real future? The nearby conversations quieted as heads turned toward our exchange. Dad, Emily warned, sensing the tension. Larry continued, emboldened by alcohol and audience. Why don't you do everyone a favor and cut ties with my wife and her family? Your presence is just uncomfortable. I studied him calmly, suddenly understanding Susan's attraction to this man. He represented everything she thought she wanted. Status, security, respectability. You know what's uncomfortable, Larry? I said, my voice quiet but carrying. Having $500 million in your wife's bank while listening to you demonstrate exactly why that's a poor investment decision. Larry's face froze. What? I think I'll close my account on Monday. I continued conversationally. My financial advisors have been suggesting it for months, but I kept it open out of respect for Susan. Clearly, that respect isn't mutual. The silence around us was absolute. Susan had appeared at Larry's side, her face ashen. Daniel, she began. Larry didn't mean. Oh, I think he meant exactly what he said. I replied calmly. And I meant what I said about the account. Larry's expression cycled rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror as the reality of who I was, and what he'd just done, sank in completely. The aftermath of my announcement rippled through the reception like a stone dropped in still water. Conversations halted, replaced by urgent whispers and surreptitious glances. Larry stood paralyzed, his face ashen as the full consequences of his actions sank in. Susan broke the silence first. Daniel, perhaps we should discuss this privately. Nothing to discuss, I replied calmly. Larry made his position quite clear. Jason appeared at my side, barely containing his glee. Man, you should see the bank president's face right now. He looks like someone just canceled Christmas. Larry recovered enough to attempt damage control. There's clearly been a misunderstanding. I had no idea that you were a successful composer. I supplied. Or a major depositor at your wife's bank. Which part confused you exactly? Several guests poorly disguised their amusement. Emily watched the exchange with undisguised satisfaction. This is hardly the appropriate setting, Larry hissed, his politician's mask slipping further. You seemed comfortable enough insulting me in this setting, I observed. Interesting how propriety only matters when you're on the receiving end. Susan placed a restraining hand on Larry's arm as he opened his mouth to retort. Perhaps we should rejoin our other guests, she suggested tightly. As they retreated, Emily joined me. That was epic, Dad, she whispered. I've never seen Larry speechless before. Not my intention, I replied honestly. But I'm done being the villain in their narrative. The band resumed, playing, as the wedding party attempted to restore normalcy. I moved toward the exit, my purpose for attending fulfilled. Jason intercepted me. Leaving so soon? The show's just getting started. The bank's executive team is huddled in the corner having what appears to be a complete meltdown. I shook my head. I've made my point. Spectacularly, Jason agreed. You know, Susan never told anyone about your success. I think she needed to believe you were still struggling to justify her choices. That insight resonated more than I expected. Perhaps we all construct narratives that allow us to sleep at night, that make our decisions seem wise and necessary rather than simply human. Take care of Emily, I said, embracing him. And yourself. As I waited for the elevator, I heard quick footsteps behind me. I turned to find Susan, slightly breathless. You're leaving? She asked. I've stayed long enough. She studied me, really seeing me perhaps for the first time in years. Were you this successful when we were together? I smiled sadly. No, but I was always this determined. The elevator doors opened, offering escape from a conversation 20 years overdue. Daniel, Susan said quietly. About the account. We found ourselves in the quiet hallway outside the reception, the muffled sounds of celebration creating an ironic backdrop for our conversation. Was that necessary? Susan asked, her voice tight, threatening the bank over personal insults. Not threats, I replied calmly. Larry made his feelings clear, and I'm making a business decision based on that information. She sighed, smoothing her wedding dress absently. He doesn't know you like I do. He doesn't understand. That's just it, Susan, I interrupted gently. You don't know me anymore either. You've built this narrative where I'm still the struggling musician you left behind, where your decision was the only sensible choice. Her eyes met mine, a flash of painful recognition crossing her face. Why didn't you ever tell him? I asked. About the Oscar, the company, any of it. Susan looked away. It complicated the story. Your story, you mean? She didn't deny it. I built a life based on certain choices, Daniel. Certain values. If you succeeded on your own terms, then maybe you were wrong about what matters. I finished quietly. We stood in silence, 20 years of unspoken truths hanging between us. I wasn't wrong about everything, she finally said. We wanted different lives. That hasn't changed. No, I agreed. It hasn't. From inside the reception, we heard Larry's raised voice, followed by the bank president's urgent tones. Susan closed her eyes briefly. He'll recover, I said. Politicians always do. And the account? She asked. I considered this. The truth was, I kept my money at Bennett Financial partly from inertia and partly from some lingering sense of connection to Susan. Neither was a good enough reason to stay. I'll transfer most of it, I decided. But I'll leave enough to show there's no personal vendetta. This isn't about punishing you, Susan. Relief flickered across her face, followed by something more complex. Perhaps recognition that even now, I was considering her well-being. You know, she said softly, sometimes I hear your compositions on film soundtracks. I always know it's you, even before seeing the credits. There's a particular quality to your work, a Daniel Moore signature. The admission surprised me. You follow my career? From a distance, she conceded. It would have been easier if you'd failed. The honesty was refreshing after years of carefully maintained narratives. Probably, I agreed with a small smile. But when did I ever take the easy path? Susan laughed, a genuine sound I hadn't heard in years. Never. That was the problem, and maybe the point. Emily appeared in the doorway, her expression cautious. Everything okay? Susan composed herself, stepping back. Your father was just leaving. I nodded. Congratulations on your marriage, Susan. I mean that. As I walked toward the elevator, Emily followed. I'll walk you out. Behind us, Susan returned to her wedding reception, to Larry and damage control and the life she had chosen. But something had shifted. A long-held tension finally released. Emily rode with me in the taxi, unusually quiet as Manhattan's lights blurred past our windows. You okay? I asked, studying her profile, so like her mother's, yet with an openness Susan had long since traded for professional polish. Yeah, she said, just processing. Larry's face when you mentioned the account. Worth every awkward family dinner I'll endure for the next decade. I laughed. I wasn't trying to create drama. Of course not. Emily smirked. You just casually mentioned $500 million during a wedding toast. She had a point. Part of me, a small, petty part one rarely acknowledged, had enjoyed watching Larry's carefully constructed worldview crumble in real time. Do you think Mom knew? Emily asked suddenly. About how successful you've become. I considered this. She knew some. Maybe not the extent. She kept your first film award in her office drawer, Emily said. I found it when I was looking for stamps once. She shut the drawer so fast when I asked about it. This revelation settled uncomfortably. I'd imagined Susan dismissing my achievements, not secretly tracking them. People are complicated, I said finally. Even parents. Emily nodded. I remember when she left. You never said a bad word about her. Not once. She's your mother. Still, most divorced dads don't take the high road like that. We arrived at my building, but Emily made no move to get out. What you said tonight about following your passion despite the risks. She hesitated. I've been thinking about deferring law school. I turned to face her fully. For music production? She nodded. Your studio internship made me realize. I'm good at this, Dad. Really good. But Larry says. What does your mother say? I interrupted gently. Emily looked surprised. She said I should talk to you, actually. That you'd understand better than she would. Something warm bloomed in my chest. After everything, Susan still recognized what I could offer our daughter that she couldn't. Permission to choose an uncertain path. Law school will always be there, I said. But if music production lights you up inside, that fire is worth following. Even if it's risky. Especially then, I replied. Safety rarely leads to fulfillment. Emily leaned over to hug me, her embrace fierce. Thanks, Dad. As she pulled back, her phone chimed with a text. It's Mom. Apparently, Larry's in full damage control mode. The bank president looks ready to murder him. I winced. Not my intention. Maybe not. Emily grinned, but sometimes karma works through unexpected channels. She kissed my cheek before sliding out of the taxi. I'll call you tomorrow. This wedding reception is about to become legendary. As the taxi pulled away, I realized something profound. I no longer needed Susan to acknowledge my success. I no longer needed Larry to respect my choices. I had built exactly the life I wanted, on my own terms. And that was victory enough. 3 months passed. Autumn faded into winter, and Manhattan transformed under a rare, pristine snowfall. I was working late in my studio when my phone rang, Susan's number appearing on the screen. We'd had minimal contact since the wedding, apart from a brief, polite email exchange regarding the account transfers. I had kept my word, moving most funds, but maintaining enough to avoid appearing vindictive. Susan, I answered surprised. Everything okay? Yes, she said, her voice carefully neutral. I'm calling because the bank is hosting its annual arts endowment dinner next month. We'd like you to be the keynote speaker. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. You want me to speak at a bank function? After everything. It's my idea. Actually, she admitted. The theme is unconventional paths to success. Seemed appropriate. The irony wasn't lost on me. What does Larry think about this? A pause. Larry and I are taking some time apart. This was unexpected. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? She asked, a hint of the old Susan breaking through her professional veneer. Yes, I said truthfully. I never wished you unhappiness. She sighed. The wedding debacle was just a symptom. Larry wanted a trophy wife who would support his political ambitions, not a CEO with her own opinions. His loss, I said simply. Another pause. Emily showed me her music production portfolio. Susan continued. She's talented, like her father. She is, I agreed, waiting for the usual concerns about career stability. I told her I'd help her defer law school. Susan said instead that sometimes the less conventional path is the right one. I nearly dropped the phone. You did. Don't sound so shocked, Daniel. I'm capable of growth. Her tone was dry, but I heard the smile in her voice. About the endowment dinner. I'll do it, I said. You haven't even asked about the fee. Consider it a favor between old friends. Susan was quiet for a moment. Are we? Friends. We share a remarkable daughter and 2 decades of history. I replied. I'd say we're something. Something, she echoed. I suppose that's accurate. After we hung up, I sat at my piano, fingers finding a melody I hadn't played in years, the first composition I'd written after our separation. It had begun as something mournful, but evolved into something unexpected, hopeful. Like life itself, I supposed. My phone pinged with a text from Emily. Dad. Just heard from Mom about the keynote. Full circle moment much? I smiled, thinking how differently things had unfolded from what I'd expected the night of the wedding. I hadn't attended seeking vindication or revenge, though both had found me regardless. What I'd found instead was something more valuable. Peace with the past, pride in my daughter, and the quiet certainty that staying true to myself had been the right choice all along. Some might call it revenge, the dropout becoming the keynote, the struggling musician winning acclaim, the ex-husband finding contentment while the new marriage faltered. But I saw it differently. This wasn't revenge. It was life, playing out its own perfect composition.